This is the legend of a man named Carter. Born in Campbell River, Canada, Carter enjoyed a vibrant, lively childhood on Vancouver Island. At 5 years old, he began studying piano, and he would hone in on his musical talent. Carter would spend the majority of his early years in the province of British Columbia, where he would eventually complete a Bachelor of Music at the University of British Columbia. Realizing his potential, Carter went further and pursued a Master of Music at Juilliard, a Master of Musical Arts at the Yale School of Music, and a doctoral post-residency at Yale. Throughout this time, Carter would already perform with the world's most renowned orchestras, including the Montreal Symphony Orchestra and the Polish National Radio Symphony Orchestra. Carter was happy. And then in 2025, Carter's life would change forever, in ways that made the world pay attention. In May 2025, Carter competed at the Irish Grand Slam of Piano, the 2025 Dublin International Piano Competition. After each round of intense competition, Carter won first prize. Just 5 days later, Carter would compete at the U.S. Open of Piano, the 2025 Cliburn International Piano Competition. Through his performances, Carter finished as a finalist at the Cliburn. Eventually, Carter would hone in on the Canadian Grand Slam of Piano, the 2025 Honens International Piano Competition, in October 2025. After honing in on his performances, Carter would win second prize at Honens. That's right. In just 5 months of 2025, Carter would either win a Grand Slam of Piano or complete an impressive result at a Grand Slam of Piano. This is just the beginning. With a warm stage presence, compelling musical personality, and cutting-edge programming, Carter has been described by Gramophone as sincere, communicative, and intelligent, drop-dead gorgeous, and even the greatest thing since sliced bread. Carter has made the piano move in many ways to audiences around the world. He has told the stories of composers around the world. But as we hone in on Honens, it is time to tell his story, his adventures, his legend. This is the legend of Carter Johnson. Carter, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure for me.
So, let's start off from the very, very beginning. What inspired you to pursue piano?
My grandmother and the music itself.
So, how was the music culture back then on Vancouver Island, and how did they influence you forward in piano?
I grew up in Campbell River, where we had a great and a thriving musical community, particularly for such a small town. As I got older, I realized that it was actually something quite rare, I think. And so I was very lucky to be raised there, and I was lucky to have an absolutely fantastic teacher.
So in terms of that, from those early music influences and from what you've learned back then on the island, you worked with Shelley Roberts at 5 years old. And
Correct.
You worked with her for over 12 years, actually, in terms of piano. What were the most important lessons that you learned from her?
She was very picky, first of all, that we do absolutely everything in the score to its uttermost, not just kind of half doing things. And she was very animated in her teaching and very expressive, and was not the kind of teacher that would, sit and listen and then after the playing is over, say, okay, I thought this and this thing. She was guiding the playing as you were doing it. Most of the teaching was actually in that a lot of the times. And so which I think for children is a very effective way to teach. And so she just made the music come alive.
Yeah. And I think with children at that age being able to learn any instrument, there's the importance of discipline, right? Just being able to sit down and being able to understand the music and what you're supposed to do, the fundamentals. They're not necessarily at the level yet to create their own interpretations of stuff, right? I mean, there's the odd exception, of course, but not everybody is like that. There's not that they don't know everything off the top, and frankly, even those who are able to do it, nobody knows everything off the top, rather, or from the very beginning. It's we all need guidance in some way, especially at a young age, right? So I think that involved teaching, as you mentioned, is important really for everybody, because they need to know what the right thing to do things are. Not you can do anything you want with that kind of thing, right? It has to be disciplined and orderly in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much you have to impart to young students in terms of just things that we consider very basic principles of taste, in Baroque playing, in classical playing. I mean, nobody comes out of the womb knowing that stuff. There is a certain level of imposition for those basic principles that you just have to do a lot of that kind of work. But there is also, there is a process of finding the odd, original thought in their playing. I mean, children make music in such a free and expressive way, but in the context of piano lessons, sometimes there can kind of be a stiffness to the playing because they think of wrong notes and all of the different things they have to do. But then sometimes you get bits of they just had an idea to do something a little bit different, which you have to catch those and you have to encourage them and then kind of pull them out over time. And that's, and we keep doing that as adults. That's part of becoming a more finished artist. But it begins at that young age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's finding that balance too, right? And I think, even with Jonathan Crow, who I've had earlier on the podcast, he mentioned how even when he taught violin, when he teaches violin, especially for the younger students, but even for university students too, it's about finding that balance between maintaining the technique, but also nurturing the growth of their musicality or their music style for each musician. So I think that balance has to be struck somewhere quite early on.
Yeah, it's an ever-changing, ever-evolving process, because the ideal is that you begin with this high level of control. Everything is talking about quarter notes, how to read the staff. It's just rules after rules after rules that you have to learn. And then if the ratio over time can change so that then you're learning less about rules, less about what you have to do, and it just becomes all, okay, I know that stuff. Now what do I want to do? That's the dream. It's a little like parenting, actually. At the beginning you have to hold on like that, and then if you do it well over time, you can kind of let go. So quite similar.
Exactly. Yeah, quite similar in those ways. And going to your own pathway as you would grow up and become an adult, you would then go to UBC to pursue a Bachelor of Music. What inspired you to do that?
I began with the fact that I wanted to do a Bachelor of Music, period, which was the first decision, and one that I think by the time I was graduating high school, one that I already knew the answer to. I had arrived at that already, so it wasn't really a problem for me. And then I went to UBC because like, well, I mean, the immediate thing is that it's closer to my family. I was quite young, actually. I didn't have to fly somewhere farther away. But then also, the other draw to me was having a lesson with my teacher there, sort of a trial lesson, which I thought was really great. It made me even more interested in working there, because having a good teacher in your corner is especially at that age is really, really important.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you and I were both born on Vancouver Island, and I mean, you were born in Campbell River. I was born in Victoria, so I mean, a quick BC ferry ride across the sort of
Yeah.
body of water over to Vancouver is it's much more preferable than, at least I think in my opinion, than having to take a flight and stay there long term and all that stuff, right? I mean, it's just a lot more preferable. I think I
Yeah.
mean, because you're always going to be close to home, not that close to home, but still close enough to home.
Yeah, and I was able to live with my aunts and my uncles, actually, because of where UBC is. So that is all part of that, what you're saying.
Yeah. So how was that transition though, from an academic perspective, from studying music before university to now your first foray into the university structure?
Um, it wasn't really a problem. I didn't find it very difficult, actually. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm not remembering enough about freshman year. I mean, I guess there is a lot that's different. But I never lived on campus. That's not true. I lived on campus 1 year of the four. But I didn't spend a lot of time on campus, really. Um, I didn't have a ton of friends at school. The school music schools are not always social like other departments are. So I really kind of I want to say I did a lot of practicing, but I didn't do a lot of practicing in those years. But what I did do was a lot of um, playing for voice lessons, and that's how I made money. And I, I I kind of did it for the money, but as the years went on, I realized what a profound influence that was having on me, to be able to listen to so many voice lessons and to be able to familiarize myself with all of that repertoire, which I didn't know at all. I mean, that was a, not that you shouldn't get paid for your work, but like that is the sort of thing that, like, there would be a reason for someone to even do it for free, just to get that kind of valuable experience. So I think maybe that was just as important for me as practicing, even at that young age, just to have all of those influences around me. Um, so I think my years that combined with my solo lessons, which were going really well, I think that my years at UBC were musically really, really very fruitful.
Yeah, and I think even those exposures to voice in voice lessons and from education in the voice world, I think that would also be influential, even the way how you play and perform as well. Right now, you're a lot more conscious. First of all, you're exposed to new repertoire, and second of all, you're exposed to new perspectives in repertoire that you may not have necessarily gotten if you just went straight only towards just piano, just focusing only on anything that's related directly to piano. So I think getting that perspective alone could very much influence, especially for I think romantic era and later era composers who focused a lot on bel canto singing, for example. I think that part, that understanding of the lyrical sense of music, I think is one thing that would have been very beneficial for you and for anybody who did that in terms of their music education.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it never was, playing with string players was always mandated, or wind players for chamber music in school. That was always a thing that people had to do, but they never had to work with singers, except you would do one class and you would have to play with a singer maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of a semester. In my opinion, that's really nothing. Like, I think that should be, um, require, actually no, at UBC I think every pianist had to work with a singer or two, now that I remember. So that is really good that they had that, but I think I don't know if anybody is doing it enough, to be honest. As far as I'm concerned, just to get to know the operatic repertoire, uh, which is something that otherwise we can totally seal ourselves off from. If we don't want to get to know the operatic repertoire, we have just nothing bringing us to the opera house as pianists, really. So I just for that reason alone, I think it's so important.
Yeah, yeah. Even with the German Lieder, for example, is also a good foray into it. Even the art song for piano and voice as well. I think that's something I think there would maybe be. I mean, maybe that's not necessarily to the opera house on its own, but probably a reason to be involved with voice because that is where you would see quite a number of influences even from that for some composers going into piano as well, even solo piano. But from the experiences writing that music, I think would be very much an important perspective. Also, even in that example alone, for that part.
I had a professor who changed my life when she said that I'm paraphrasing, but how could you just play Schubert piano music and chamber music without knowing the songs? How could you do that? Because if you play the songs, you understand how he sets text. You understand what kinds of musical gestures, sounds, harmonies are associated with, ideas, literature, and poetry. And then even in a piano sonata, we don't have a text, but we have the code from the art songs. And so you can kind of bring that understanding in. Whereas if you don't know the songs, I mean, you lose a lot. So I agree with you. It's for those composers, it really kind of is the key in many ways.
Yeah, music requires one to be very well-rounded in many different types of pieces, and I would even go as far as to say even genres of music too now, because with these different perspectives, not only do you develop your own skill set in that area, but you're also able to communicate to audiences better, at least from my own personal experience and from what I've at least noticed in the current trends in the music world. When you're able to better relate to your audiences and express that through the music, whatever it is, I think that's where a musician really shines, and that's I think where even the genre, even the music world shines really, in that ability to relate to audiences. After all, they're paying money to see whoever or whatever, right? So they're going to want to at least get something out of it, and if you can relate to them in whatever way, they're going to come back for more and be satisfied for more. So very much so, I think it's good to see that at least at UBC, there's that early exposure or early-ish exposure or requirement to be exposed to different areas that are not just within one's strictly own instrument discipline.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I think a broad range of experiences, particularly early on, is in the formative years is really important because there are people who don't have that, and then when they are kind of exposed to that later on with their life, particularly when people get older, it can sometimes, for whatever reason, I think it's a little more difficult for people. So I agree completely.
Yeah, yeah. In your experience, you would also pursue a Master of Music at Juilliard and also a Master of Musical Arts at Yale. What inspired you to do both of these things?
Um, the fact that I guess that's what people do. You get a bachelor's degree, you get a master's degree, and then I did get to the point where I did want a DMA because that's a decision that everybody has the big question: do I want to get the DMA? And I realized that I did, and I wanted to go to Yale. Um, and so I did the MMA at Yale as a way of getting to know the school and getting to know the faculty uh, before applying for the DMA, which for me, I think that was a good move. And so that was just the pathway. I mean, if you want to get a DMA, you have to go through all the degrees, and those particular schools were the ones that accepted me, and I thought that it was the best offer I had at the time. So that's how it happened.
Yeah, yeah. And throughout your performing opportunities and experience over those years and really up until the present day, at some point you ended up being involved with Angela Hewitt. How did you first meet her? And how did you get the opportunity to perform alongside her in numerous chamber music performances over the years?
We met at the Bach competition in Leipzig uh, in 2022, I think. I believe it was 2022. And I was in the semifinals, and then they did the finalist announcement, and I wasn't in the finals. And then we got to talk to the jury, and I think she was really the only one that liked me, if I'm being honest. I have, sometimes you think, the competition is really tough. I'm never going to make it. But at that particular results announcement, I have to say, I thought probably I, I thought I would. I was a little surprised, and then even more surprised that really nobody liked my playing except for her, which I was very happy that she did, and so she invited me to come to her master classes in Italy the following year, where she has 10 of us, and she works with us like the whole day for like a week, and it was fabulous. And I loved working with her. I loved working with her. She just, I felt like a different musician by the end of that week, both in working with her and in just hearing her work on all of this repertoire, not just Bach, not just Mozart, but kind of we went through everything. And then she asked me to perform with her at Ottawa Chamber Fest, where we played the Brahms Haydn variations. And then I got to perform again with her in a few concerts where we played some duets, as well as at the end we played the Bach C minor double concerto. That was at her festival in Perugia, the Trasimeno Festival. That was, I guess, this past summer. And then we have more to come, which I cannot yet speak about. But at some point that will be announced. So, and then also the first time we really got to play together actually was at her festival in Italy. I forgot to mention, it's not festival, the master classes in 2023. And it wasn't anything formal. It was at the very end of, I think it was the last day, and I was the last person to play for her. And I was going to play the Mozart G major concerto, 453. And we were all so tired. And she goes, I love this concerto. I've been playing it a lot lately. It's one of my favorites. I really love it. And then she goes, everyone, do you want me to just play it for you? And she said, Carter, can you play the second piano part? We hadn't rehearsed. I'd never practiced it, but I knew the music. It's not that hard. And and yet we hadn't rehearsed. And so in the performance, there was a certain beautiful sort of spontaneity of connection. Because, we have tempos coming together at ritardandi, coming in and out of cadenzas, those kinds of things. We're always having to connect, which we did in real time in our performance, just, for the maybe dozen people that were sitting there. And that was kind of the first performance that I have a fond memory of, even though it was just a spur of the moment thing, because it was just so lovely. So that's the history.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That spur of the moment, that sort of spontaneous performance of that piece, and then you also rising up to the occasion to play it as well on that part as well. That's an unbelievable. That is amazing, an amazing experience overall, as well as meeting her at the competition back then as well. From your experiences in master classes with her and also performing with her as well, what were the most important lessons that you learned from Angela?
She does have a few things that keep cropping up. Never rush. Never rush. Even in music where you think that it's the kind of music where you can, rush a little bit, don't rush. It's better if you don't. And it's not, see, this is the thing about it. It's not just she has these rules and everybody has to follow them. It's like once you start doing them, you realize, oh, that is really much better. So rushing is one of those things. And she's so in control of that in her own playing. I think through, she said it's not easy. It's a lot of work to teach yourself to have that sort of inner calm presence so that you're not rushing along with the music and anything is getting out of control. So that's one thing. And then she has a certain openness to her sound, which I think really you can only really understand if you hear her play in person. And she'll make really big sounds, big, round, beautiful sound. They fill the whole hall, and yet the sound is never too thick or stodgy or too, like, you can always hear everything so clearly. You'll have gorgeously ringing deep bass notes, and then some things above that are thinned out a little bit, and then she'll bring out a couple of other of the most important harmonic notes. Like, she's really good at thinking of sound in this very three-dimensional way, which I think actually, I don't even know if she talked about it that much, but you just, over the course of a week, she's working with everybody and you just hear it. And you get to hear, the difference between what she's doing and what the student is doing. And for me, that was one of the qualities that stood out the most. Respecting everything in the score is another one of, of course we have to do that, but she would show you places where you thought you were, but you're not. And again, it's not just you do it because, those are the rules, but it's always, look how much better this is when you do it that way. And it almost always is like that. So those are some of the most important lessons.
Yeah. No, those are very important when they give you a good perspective, a new perspective into, whoa, I didn't actually think of it that way. And it actually sounds a lot better, right? Rushing, I think, is a common problem that so many, I think almost everybody faces in playing music, especially when you're younger and when you're a kid. You just want to play the fastest pieces out there, right? You just want to play every single fast piece, but the thing is, and it doesn't help that for some people who don't know anything about music, for example, and when they want to listen to classical music, they want to listen to something that's really upbeat or something that's really catches their attention, right? So they only hear the faster pieces, right? Like anything from Tchaikovsky or from Liszt or from Rachmaninoff or whatnot. But the thing is that sort of patience, I think, is important, and I think it's also correlative with age too. As you get older, you tend to spend more time, and you tend to understand, your understanding of time evolves and grows, and it matures to the extent where you're able to take more time on things versus when you're a kid or a teenager and you look at things, like as a teen, things have to be going at a super fast speed for everything. Everything has to be done today or tomorrow, that kind of thing, right? So that patience, I think, is a skill and a virtue that really takes time to mature. Interestingly enough, it takes patience to build patience as well as a skill. And I think Angela, having taught you that, I think it's a very important lesson, not just for us, but really for everybody, even in life too. It takes time to do certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. And she is a good example of how taking your time in your playing, not being in such a hurry all the time, it pays dividends.
Yeah. So then we come to 2025, and the first competition that you take part in was the 2025 Dublin International Piano Competition. How did you prepare for the competition, and what inspired you to compete in this competition?
Well, I had done it before, actually. The previous one was in 2022, I want to say, maybe 23. I forget how often they have them. But I'd done it before, and I was a quarter finalist. I actually had my Mark Anderson, my teacher, won. I believe it was maybe fourth prize in the very first edition of this competition. So he had that connection with them. So I had actually been thinking about it from years prior. And then my other professor, Wei Yang, also did that competition. And it's considered, a major competition. And I was kind of doing all of them. I at least trying to as much as I could if I would get into them. So there was that also. So I figured, why not do this competition? And it was right before the Cliburn. And so I came to the idea that rather than them sort of competing with each other, it would actually also help me prepare for the Cliburn just because the timing worked out. So it just seemed like a good fit for me.
Yeah. And take us through each of those rounds all the way to the finals. What were you feeling and thinking in each round?
The first round it's a shorter recital. Oh man, I always remember what I play in all of these competitions, and I'm not remembering what I played. I played some Shostakovich preludes. Yeah, I remember some Prokofiev pieces and maybe Clementi Sonata in the middle, I think, and the commissioned work. That was the program, I believe, and then and I thought that went quite well. Actually, I was quite happy with that, and I missed my flight, or I missed my second flight because my first flight was late, so I was stuck in DC for a whole day before getting there. So I actually got there, quite late. I was quite jet lagged, but I was happy. And then the second round, the semifinal was a longer recital followed by chamber music immediately after. So it was a long time of being on stage, and I played Brahms' Opus 76 pieces and the Hindemith Third Sonata, and then Brahms' Piano Quintet right after, which the solo or was it the opposite? Was it quintet and then solo? Now I can't remember, but they were back to back. The quintet I was really happy with. I loved working with that quartet. They were fabulous. And the onstage energy was exactly what you wanted. Chamber music, they were giving, I was giving, that chemistry can happen. That was wonderful. Solo recital wasn't quite so happy with, but that happens sometimes. And then, but I made it through anyways. And then the final, I played Prokofiev's second concerto, which was only the second time I had played it. And I was totally terrified before that performance because I hadn't played it for a year. And it's just, I mean, as you know, it's just pretty difficult. And concertos already, there's especially not just any concerto, but in the final round of a big competition, concertos are scary enough without that. And so then you add that, and you add the fact that it's the Prokofiev second. I mean, I had been practicing it like crazy, so it's not like I really felt underprepared, but there's just this, when you step on stage with that concerto, it's like you have this huge mountain to ascend, and you're just looking up at it, and there's just a sense of heaviness with which I approach that concerto, actually. So it is very enjoyable to play in some ways, but in some ways there's actually quite a difficulty in it, emotionally even. So, but I was pretty happy with it overall in the end. And again, I thought the orchestra was wonderful, and I had a great connection with the conductor. So all in all, just a totally wonderful experience from every perspective. But I've been talking about the performances. Overall, I have wonderful memories of those performances.
Yeah. And with all those performances put together, this ended up in one final result. Take us to that moment when your name was announced as the first prize winner of the Dublin International Piano Competition. What was it like?
Well, the big moment was when they announced second prize, because once they announced second, then you already know who won first. So actually, when they announced my name, it was, not not the scariest moment because it's the second prize winner's name that's the scary moment. But the other two finalists were so nice. I loved, even just spending time with them backstage. Sometimes you have nice camaraderie with your fellow contestants. So it's always, if I get a favorable result, it's always mixed in with a little bit of sadness for the others. Actually, I think some people don't really have that so much. But especially if I know the other contestants, but that really was only a small percentage of what was going on for me at that moment. It was mostly I was just really happy, and yeah, I don't have much else to say. It was a wonderful moment.
Nice. Yeah, but just 5 days later, and you mentioned this briefly as well, the Van Cliburn happened immediately after, basically. So that was only 5 days later. You then competed at Van Cliburn. How did you prepare for that, and what inspired you to compete for that competition?
Well, I mean, it's one of the big competitions. Everybody wants to do it. I think for most people that is pianistically kind of their, either that or the Chopin, or I guess at one point the Tchaikovsky, and so I mean, and I had also done that one before. I didn't make it into the main rounds, but I was in the screening auditions for the previous edition, and I was an alternate. But I never, made it off the wait list. But because I had learned the commission work for that one and everything, I was extra invested in it. So I watched it a lot, and then I actually, with a friend, flew in to hear the last two rounds, the last two nights of the finals, which I heard in 2022. So that was fantastic to be in Bass Hall for, to hear the concertos and to be there live. It's not the same to just watch online versus to be in Fort Worth, and also to hear the acoustic. And so that was really helpful for me, because then when I was preparing for the next one, because I had that 3-year period which I spent the whole 3 years thinking about what I was going to play. I worked on that a lot. Every week I had a new program idea, and then I would kind of sit with it for a while to see how I felt about it. And then sometimes I would go, no, I'm going to toss that. Or, this works, but this doesn't work. I'm going to find some other piece to put there. I did a huge amount of work for that. And actually all of my repertoire for the past couple of years before this was learned with the idea of what will I play in the Cliburn, although even I changed a couple of things even a few months before, right up until, when I had to put it down, I was still changing it. So, but my practice leading up to it and my preparation was, it's a mental game for me, at least before competition, in figuring out which things need to be prepared when. Because you can't work on everything at the same time. I mean, you have 3 solo recitals and you have 3 concertos. Different rounds have to be, or different pieces have to be sort of prepared at different points in time. Maybe some people can do this, but I would never really think to get all however many hours of music ready to a certain level and then just keep it on simmer, everything at once. I couldn't do that. For this competition, the idea that I reached from doing it in other competitions and it working well for me was having the later music readier sooner, but then the music for the earlier rounds you're practicing right up until the beginning. So that then in the first couple of rounds, I had just been practicing that music a lot in the past couple of weeks, so it was really fresh. And then when you get into the later rounds, like the semifinal, you haven't been practicing it so much recently, but you were playing it so much before because it was ready sooner, that it's easier to heat up again quickly. You know what I'm saying? So that I had done that kind of successfully in previous competitions, and so that was also what I was trying to do here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, yeah, I totally understand that strategy because especially the first round of really any competition, national or international, it's the nervousness that gets to really almost every pianist that goes
Of
to these
course.
competitions, right? It's that lack of familiarity. And I think this even happens for repeat competitors of the Chopin and the Cliburn competitions. I've seen it even in the 2025 Chopin as well. Many of the first prize, no, not first prize, I mean first round competitors just got caught by the lack of familiarity with the hall just in general. And even with all the practice that they've done, I'm not sure if they actually did the strategy as you did, but I would assume probably not for a lot of them because I've heard some of these pianists even before they were at the Chopin competition, when they were at different performances or other competitions where they played those same pieces. I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, they did not sound like that before. Before they sounded a lot better, but now they sounded honestly disastrous even. Honestly, and I'm thinking it's because most likely they didn't prepare the way that you did in in respecting the nervousness that you cannot predict that comes from that first round. And I
Yes.
think so many of them, that's why they fell apart. Some of them just straight up fell apart in the first round. I heard it in 2025. I heard it in 2021 as well. And it's really tragic to see that. But I think that's why, again, like your strategy is quite a good one in staving off as much of of those issues as possible.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I think that in terms of being secure for a performance which you know you're going to be nervous, I have to play that music like crazy leading right up to the event. It doesn't matter if it was ready the previous week. If I don't practice it a lot the week of, I'm toast. So, yes, I agree. I am also the most nervous in the first round by far. And that can help compensate for it.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope it does.
Well, it did for 2025 for sure for you. So it worked out very very well for you. So
You know what? I had a few things in my first round that I really wasn't so happy with, but everybody does. Well, maybe some pianists don't actually, but it probably wasn't a lot, but it was always like if you were here, we were listening through my performances. Still, I have this problem. I can listen and I just go, oh, I hear a little thing coming, even if it's a wrong note that almost nobody can hear. Um, it's just listening to my own playing is a constant awareness of it. I really hate that actually. I wish I could be free from that.
yeah,
And just go, who cares about that? But in most cases, it just. But anyway, that's not important because I was happy with my first round performance overall, and nothing bad happened really. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think it's the perfectionist in all of us that wants to. Oh, come on! I could have done that a little bit better. That kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I really have to. I've talked to other contestants who say the same thing. You really have to wait a couple of days before you can really listen to your recording from a competition and feel objectively, or at least a little bit more objectively. You can't listen to it right after because you're only listening for the things which you just did that you're mad about, and it's not healthy almost to do that kind of listening. So, um, but it can be difficult to be objective. That is true. So
Yeah,
that's why I sometimes have absolutely no idea where I'm gonna stand in a competition. Uh, people say, Do you think you're going to get through? Do you think you're not going to get through?" I have no idea. I mean, I hear other people in the hall and compare them, and then I could hear people online and I could compare them based on an online sound, which is not as reliable as in the hall. But myself, I feel like I could never
yeah,
be able to say, especially something like the Cliburn, one way or another, oh, I think I will get through, or I think I won't get through. I I never had that sense after any of the rounds because I don't know how my playing will sound to other people. It's a totally different experience.
yeah. And I think it's healthier to have that kind of mindset, right? Because let's say you in your mind you thought, yeah, I'm going to the next round, but you don't make it. That's gonna really really hit hard, right?
Yeah.
And even the inverse. Oh, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. But you do make it. Great. But then you've already defeated yourself from an emotional standpoint that, and these rounds go by quickly too. So, oh, you're not at 100%. You're at maybe 90% or 85% going into
Because
that,
you're
right?
not coming into it with your best attitude. Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely right.
So it's more like your approach is really good in the sense that I don't know. I'm just going to be ready whether or not I get in. I'm going to be ready, right? And
Uh-huh.
that kind of thing, right? Of course, there are going to be some surprises. Like in your case, in the Bach competition, you didn't make it in. That was surprising, but it's not going to absolutely destroy you from an emotional standpoint. I hope it didn't actually.
No, you know what? I wasn't so very happy with it, I have to say. But in the end, being able to meet Angela and make that connection with her was far more important than a prize that I would have got from that competition. So in the end, I have no regrets about that experience. So,
Yeah.
and you have to learn, with every bad competition result. I mean, you have to figure out some way to make it helpful to you rather than it just being some sad thing where you failed. I mean, um, we don't have enough time to spend all of our time on something like that and then it just be kind of a dead end sort of thing. I mean, even if it was a disappointment of a thing, you have to figure out what you can get from it that will, enrich your not just your pianistic skill set, but your sense of how to navigate within the industry, or how to do competitions. Any time you can take some disappointing thing and make a learning experience out of it. I think if I did competitions all this way without learning that, I think I would have given up at some point because of how discouraging it can be if you like allow yourself to sit in that.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, competitions are not the be all and end all of everything in
Of
a
course.
person's career, right? At some point, the end goal, honestly, for competitions, the end goal is to build a career outside of that. That's what's more long term, right? Not just focusing on just competing and competing, competing all the time. And that's one of the things that I've noticed for piano, because we have this problem of, oh, if you don't win this or that competition, you're not going to have a career, or your career is going to be heavily stunted as opposed to if you did win this competition. And it's created sort of a system. And then I need to be clear, I'm not trying to bash any competitions out
Sure,
there.
of course,
It's
yeah.
just a natural consequence that comes out of competitions and people who have enjoyed careers off of competitions. So, from that natural consequence alone, that's what has led to, where those who didn't necessarily go down the competition route will have a more difficult time getting their names across into the performing realm, or really in the music realm, at least from what I've seen so far. Maybe it might be different in what you've seen, maybe on your end, but I think that's potentially a phenomenon that we have to kind of take a look at.
I think it is hard it is getting harder to do it without competitions. And yet at the same time, a lot of competitions are doing less for people than they used to. So all around it, I think in many ways it's harder. I say this like I lived in the old days. I didn't. I'm just, based on what I've heard. Um, but I do think it is dangerous, and I have fallen into this before. A lot of people think that competitions are really kind of the only thing you can do. I mean, they're the easiest thing in a way. I mean, we're trained pianists. We want to be practicing. We it's You don't really have to do any. You don't have to push yourself out of your comfort zone too far to fly somewhere and then play the music you've been working on, all these months, which is your job. It's in some ways more pleasant than figuring out other paths of how you could get things going for yourself that involve networking and sending emails and making spreadsheets. I mean, that kind of thing, that doesn't come easily to me. I don't really enjoy that part of it, but I think that people need to think a little bit more creatively in that direction and other directions in addition to competitions, just to kind of maximize uh, their potential, because some people, naturally do really well in competitions, and some just beautiful pianists, for whatever reason, it doesn't happen for them. But there are so many other wonderful things that they could be doing, that maybe they're not thinking of, because the thing to do is competitions, So that's my only gripe with them. But in general, I've had wonderful competition experiences. But they have a certain place, but there are many other, places for people to be doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. But going back to your path, though, at the Van Cliburn, that was also quite. I mean, I followed it throughout the entirety of the competition back in May and June. So I very much enjoyed for your run as well throughout that competition. Take us through each of those rounds, all the way to the finals. So the MC announces your name. You walk up the stairs to the stage. You see the audience. You bow. You sit down. You play. What were you feeling and thinking in each round?
The first, well, I'm going to say I was dealing with a actually injury to my right arm during that competition, which for the first few days I was kind of a wreck. Actually, I thought, I finally made it to the Van Cliburn competition, and I have an injured right arm. Kind of, it was just like, how awful. And then at a certain point, I thought, well, that attitude isn't really going to get me very far. So I have to at least, try to make the best of this. And so I really, for the first couple of rounds, I only practiced an hour a day, and very gentle practice. And anything more than that, I really felt like I was making my arm worse. And then I thought, I'm never, imagine I get to the finals, which I thought, probably will never happen, but you have to be prepared. And so I couldn't spend my arm entirely, in the first couple of rounds. So I had to pace myself. And that limited practice, and then a lot of left hand practice also, which is important, because when you have a memory slip, it's usually in your left hand anyways. I mean, why shouldn't our left hand get extra practice? All practice hands separately, but it's usually, there's some kind of equality of practicing left hand versus right hand, whereas I just did a whole bunch of left hand practice. How wonderful. How many bass lines did I ignore, that I got to know during that time? So in some ways, the thing with the arm may have been a blessing. I didn't over practice. I didn't exhaust myself too much at the beginning. I did a lot of score studying, and a lot of just sort of sitting at the piano with the score, and maybe kind of moving my hands around a little bit, not really playing. Every trick in the book that I could come up with, things to do that were not using my right arm. But then walking on stage in the first round on such little, I didn't play at all that day, except my warm-up period, just like 20 minutes beforehand. I warmed up and then I performed, which is crazy for me. I would never, I thought that was an insane thing. But there was kind of this sense that, I walked on stage and I didn't have a checklist of a million things I had been practicing all day that I felt that I needed to do, that I needed to execute properly. Like, I didn't have that kind of pressure. It was sort of well, this probably isn't going to be as clean as it normally is because of the thing with the right arm. So we need to make it so good in other ways that that won't be something that anybody really notices anymore, and then I had the same, and I had the same thing in my second round, actually, in the Bartok Sonata. I had something right near the beginning that I really wasn't happy with, like just a couple of licks, right at the beginning of the first movement, some octaves and jumps, and some things happened, like a couple of things. And I was like, already I thought, well, okay, it already is not a clean performance, the way I wanted it to be. So now the only thing we can do is just really dig in as much as possible and make this performance, so gripping that, it's not going to matter. And so in that respect, in rounds 1 and 2 particularly, I had a wonderful time on stage because I was able to be more spontaneous coming out of almost no practice. Or not normal practice, but like very gentle, slow, quiet practice. Like, I hardly ever actually played the piece at home leading up to it. So that was one of the most interesting things about the competition for me, was that I was able to give two performances that I was relatively happy with under those conditions. I had never thought it would be possible, but thanks to the right arm injury, I was able to figure that out, which I think is really wonderful, actually. But that was really only the first two rounds.
Wow, that's interesting how you had that injury and adapted around that, because when I had Victoria Wong on an earlier episode of my podcast, she mentioned how just a few days before she began competing, she actually strained her back.
Oh, that's awful. How awful.
So she couldn't even sit up straight for a long period of time, or really for even a short period of time too. So she had to adapt towards playing on that, but she still made it. I mean, she didn't make it past the first round, unfortunately, but she did at least compete in the first round.
Right? And she made it through.
No, she didn't. Well, she didn't pass.
No, she made it through the performance.
Yeah, she made it through the performance. Yeah, and at least from what I saw, and I think from what most people saw, if they didn't hear that story, they wouldn't know about it, right? It didn't appear.
No, I didn't know. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, oh boy, wow, that's that's a lot to be dealing with at that point. But it's interesting because, as you said, those spontaneous sorts of opportunities there or experiences there can help, and it did help in your first couple of rounds there at that point. And it also speaks to just how well adaptable a person has to be in a situation like that, right? It's even in the world of sports, I hear stories of people who just injured, maybe not necessarily taking them out of the game before it, but it is going to affect them quite a little bit going into it, especially in track and field. You hear of stuff like that and see stuff like that. But they're able to adapt and still maybe even win the gold in whatever championship event that they're in. It's really remarkable to see that sort of adaptation. And I think it's really interesting that you mentioned your anecdote, and also Victoria mentioned her story in that sense, because it just shows the adaptability that you need to be at this top level.
Yeah, that is true. Well, I guess in anything, but particularly in the performing arts, where we have certain performances on certain days that are, very high profile, that we, you either cancel them or else you have to make your best out of bad circumstances, and that's I think that's happening to a lot of people in ways that we don't even know. I think even at the Cliburn, I thought, I'm the injured one. I don't think the other people are injured. I think they're fine. That's not true. Some of them could have been injured. Some of them could have been going through something else. Not physically, but something else which is giving them a particularly rough time. So whatever it is that's going on, you just have to try and figure out how to make something positive out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And with your experiences there and making something positive and really positive, getting to the finals and doing what you did at the Van Cliburn, throughout that experience, what were the most important lessons that you learned from the Van Cliburn?
Well, for me, actually, I mean, I don't know if this is maybe what you're going for, but the lesson that I could make it through the Van Cliburn and make it through all 6 of those performances relatively unscathed. Some of them were better than others, but on the whole, I'm proud of the work that I did in that competition, and to be able to play those concertos, especially the last 2 concertos, which really are so difficult, to be able to play them under that kind of pressure after having played all of those other rounds. I think I learned something about myself that, maybe I was capable of more than I thought. And I think a lot of people in the Cliburn would probably have a similar, experience to that. And it makes other performances seem easier to me. The next time I played that Prokofiev concerto, I mean, it's a difficult piece, but it's easier and more fun to not play it in the finals of the Cliburn, because you know what I mean? It's not quite as scary as that. So I learned something about myself through that, which I think gave me, confidence, actually. And then the other most important thing I learned was exactly what I was saying about the, not maybe needing to practice so very much all the time and leading up to a performance. Maybe there are other things we could be doing, which might give a little bit more inspiration to us that we could explore. So that would be the other thing.
Yeah, yeah. I think ultimately when it comes to practice, of course you need to practice, but I think it's also the balance that we were talking about earlier on, right? Find that balance between practicing, and especially when you have to adapt to unforeseen circumstances. How do you react to those situations? And for you, I'm glad that you mentioned about earlier about looking at the music and meditating essentially on the music, because that is something that I think is also a form of practice. It's more mental practice, but just finding some sort of perspective on looking at the score defines much of what you believe and think about the music as well. And I think it helped in your case because it may have given you some last minute perspective into the repertoire that you would be performing and playing, despite not being able to necessarily execute that in a practice session given your injury.
Yeah, yeah. If worrying about technical concerns is overshadowing your inner sense of what you want to be saying to the audience, proclaiming or whispering, however you do it. But if you're not thinking about that so much in favor of just the logistics of piano playing, then I think there is something that gets missed, and that's something that all of us are working on. Still, it's hard to do that, but and a lot of that is also mindset right before you walk on stage. Is going, what kind of pianist do I want to be during this performance? Someone who's worried about all that stuff, or someone who is coming on with a inner calm, with a plan of like, I'm going to go on there and I'm going to say this. Even a lot of that work can be, I think, if people talked a little bit more about making use of those 10 minutes before the performance. I've increasingly been making sort of an agenda of actually, I'm going to go and I'm going to think about this before I go on stage. And I have been surprised actually as to how helpful that has been for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And from that experience at the Van Cliburn, just a few months later, you would then go to another competition. What inspired you to hone in on Honens?
I always wanted to do the Honens. I'm Canadian and I'm from BC, so it's actually so close to BC. And just to have such a prestigious competition happening so close to home I was always very aware of it, growing up. Probably from around the same time I was aware of the Cliburn, actually. Those were kind of the two that I was kind of always looking up to from a young age. And I always kind of really liked what Honens did in terms of encouraging, really original programming, getting people to do things which are, maybe not quite usual for other competitions. I always liked that. And so I found out I got into the semifinals, I think it was the day after the Cliburn ended. And I think I thought about it for 2 days because, sometimes people are in the finals of the Cliburn and then they go, no, that's it. I'm not going to do anything else, which I kind of had thought maybe I would entertain that idea. But the Honens was one thing that I thought, no, I do want to do that also. It was my third time applying. The first time I wasn't a quarterfinalist. The second time I was a quarterfinalist, but not a semifinalist. And then this third and last time I could do it, semifinal. So I had been kind of, each year leveling up in the Honens. And so I thought it would be such a shame if I didn't do it. It's such a wonderful competition. So it was actually an easy decision for me.
Well, thank goodness you did, because as we know, it would work out very, very well for you in that sense. And so when you reached this competition, how did you prepare for each round at Honens? And to what extent had your experience at the Cliburn and at Dublin influenced your strategy at Honens?
Uh, I think by the time Honens came, I didn't really have so much of a strategy because, first of all, most of that music I had just been playing at those other competitions. I really only had a couple of new things. It wasn't that much. And the more competitions you do, the more you just have a sense of how things will be without necessarily needing to plot so much. So this, in some ways, I just I knew how the performances would, like, even just the flow of them, the way I had designed the programs. Like, I don't know, it wasn't a lot of stressful preparation for this one, actually. And it's less music than the Cliburn. I just had to prepare two chamber music, which was part of the preparation, and I had to learn the commissioned work, which was part of the preparation, and I had one contemporary piece which I played, which was also new to me, which I learned and memorized, which was a bit of work, and then of course practicing the Prokofiev is always on the agenda. It has to always be there, even if it's a short amount of time. I'm always touching on it, and other than that, it was. I had a wonderful summer, and my Honens prep started in maybe September. Aside from playing a lot of that music during, the summer, which also is preparation, and so, yeah, it was pretty smooth.
Yeah. Now, with the preparation, there was also the commissioned piece, Fracture by Iman Habibi, who I've also had on a previous episode of my show. What was your process of learning, understanding, and uniquely interpreting Fracture?
The first thing that struck me when I looked at the score was how many different types of playing are in the piece. The contrast between sections, or even different sections within a bigger section, where he'll just vary the pianistic writing. I thought that it provided a lot of opportunities for coloristic contrast, for different, differentiating them in terms of, some of them are kind of, flying, and some of them are they have a real heavy gravity to them, all just in every way which I could think, how they could be different. I was experimenting, and I enjoyed that very much. And technically, I didn't think it was too hard, actually, although I did, in the end, underestimate a couple of parts. But overall, I liked that it was not so very difficult pianistically, because practice was able to be a little bit more imaginative rather than, just sitting down and drilling the notes out a million times. So I enjoyed all of those things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the first things that I noticed, even from right at the beginning of Fracture, was it's very, very similar to Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto. No, not Piano Concerto. Piano Sonata Number 2. The first movement
with the opening flourish.
Exactly. Like right off the bat, I'm just like, wow, that's very Rachmaninoff, but more dissonant than Rachmaninoff, of course.
I never thought of it as that, but as soon as you mention it, I know exactly what you mean. That's a very interesting comparison.
Yeah, yeah. And Iman, when he was on my show, he explained how when he was writing it, it was actually the beginning of 2025. And especially from a Canadian perspective, but also from his own personal perspective, he was just seeing how his childhood and the foundations that you thought, or he thought, were going to be so solid and strong are beginning to fracture apart due to recent events. And with that sort of mindset, with that sort of understanding, he then based the piece on that sort of thought process. So it's interesting to see that, because with that perspective, you hear where the fractures exist in the piece. Now, I intentionally withheld that episode from release until the competition was done because I didn't want to give anybody an unfair advantage by accident, right?
Right.
So, but I think afterwards, I think, okay, so this is what the composer, what Iman was thinking about when he wrote the piece. Now I think for people looking back, oh, now it's interesting retroactively to look at what the piece was all about from at least from a philosophical standpoint. But it's interesting to see because I see it in every single performance. I saw it in yours, I saw it in Elizabeth's, I saw it in Anastasia's performances, how each of you interpreted that fracture or fractures in different or even similar ways. It's really interesting to see that part.
Yeah. I mean, there were certain things in the piece which I thought it sounded more similar between the performances, and then there were certain parts which I would listen closely to what the other people were doing because it's like everybody had their own take on it. And that very frequently happens with commissioned works, and it's one of the most interesting parts of having them in a competition.
Yeah, yeah, and again, that's exactly why I did not want to release that episode before, or even during the competition, because I wanted to make sure that I didn't accidentally color any of your performances of that. I wanted to make sure that you all had that unique approach to it.
Right.
That it
Yeah.
was you, that it wasn't you, but I influenced you in any way, or Iman influenced you in any way in that at that part of the competition. And then that's exactly what I was thinking about. You know, I was considerate about that sphere of the competition. So take us through each of your performances in the semifinals and eventually in the grand finals. What were you feeling and thinking as you progressed through each round?
I was really happy with my first semifinal. I was pretty well prepared for it. First few minutes, some things from nervousness, but I thought that was my best performance of the Bartok Sonata in a competition that I had done, and that was the last piece. So I was really, really happy about that. The contemporary piece that I learned that I put just before the Bartok, also happy with that quite a bit. Um, in fact, that was probably the round that I was the most happy with of the whole competition. um, just from an overall perspective. And then the second round was really, or the second semifinal was really fun because, we got to play the Rachmaninoff, the Prokofiev cello sonata, uh, which I love playing chamber music. That was just such a treat. It was a pleasure to be able to work with Rachel and to play that piece, which was new to me. And then I really did that performance. I wasn't quite so happy with it. In some ways, I was much more nervous for whatever reason. But I was really happy with just how I programmed that round because I had both chamber and solo from both Prokofiev and Ravel, and then the commission work in the middle. And so overall, that was also a satisfying experience.
Yeah, yeah. And with all this put together, we then head to the award ceremony. Take us to that moment when you were named the second prize winner. What was that moment like?
I was just so filled with gratitude to be able to be there and to be able to win that prize. Um, and it was just, I felt a lot of warmth in that moment. So
And aside from that moment, of course, what were your favorite moments at Honens?
probably moments in my performances, actually, that I was most free, that I felt the most free. Um, I had a lot of I had wonderful times at Honens with everybody I met, with the other contestants with whom I think we got along really well. All of those things were great. But the music is why we're there. The music is the thing I'm spending all day on. And so when I can go and perform and have just moments of pleasure for me and hopefully for the audience also, uh, if you can just get that atmosphere just right, to me, those will always be the highlights of almost any competition experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it hits differently when it really hits. The atmosphere is just right, and the audience feels it. You feel it. Everybody feels it. That's I had that a couple of times at the Canadian Chopin competition when I was one of the hosts and co-organizers of it. There were a few times where I really felt the performances, especially in the final rounds back then. So that's it's always enjoyable when you get to that moment because everybody's in agreement at that point, at least from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So with 2025 being such a giant year for you, and with your experiences having performed, we then come to the question that every musician must ask themselves. What is musicality to you?
I don't even know if I really use the word musicality, to be honest. I think everybody has their own definition of it. That's why, it's kind of an elusive word. I mean, teachers, particularly teachers of young students, will say you need to be more musical. This needs to be more musical. And a lot of people ask, what does that really mean? What are you saying when you say that? I think it's maybe not a bad word. I think it means to care for the music, to care for it in all of its considerations, that it requires our attention. Uh, to hear the composer's voice, to follow our own voice, uh, to respect things in the score, but not just the printed things in ink, but also our knowledge of what's in the score combined with what we know about the composer, what we know about performance practice, what we know about the level of freedom that this particular composer afforded to interpreters of his or her music, which is not the same amongst the composers. So a sort of knowledge of all of that stuff coupled with, knowing the composer and yourself and taking all that and giving, at least in a performance, that all of that versus getting stuck on, oh, I hope I'm not going to make a mistake. Oh, I just made a mistake. I'm preaching to myself here, of course. That to musicality, if we're going to use the word, I think that it encompasses all of those things: musical freedom, generosity of spirit, curiosity. That's my very brief summary.
So, with that in mind, what is the complete artist to you?
I was asked this question at the Honens, and I was asked to describe it in 3 words, and I said curiosity 3 times. I think that's the most important quality in an artist. Uh, but then I thought about it later, and I actually thought of 3 qualities. So I'll give them to you. They were curiosity, conviction, and love. Those are my 3 qualities. So I'm just gonna, and I will leave that to everyone to interpret as they please. But those are my new 3 adjectives for the complete artist.
How do you embody the complete artist?
Oh, I would never say that I do. See, this is always the funny thing. I mean, is the first prize winner the one who was the complete artist, and then are the others, kind of close, percentage wise, they're kind of less complete, um, I think of the Honens as a festival to celebrate the idea of the complete artist. And then it's up to each of us to figure out in which ways we are respecting our idea of that, in which ways we are not. So I would never refer to myself as a complete artist. And actually I'm not, I don't know if I would trust anyone who did.
Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough. So, with your experiences at these competitions and performing over the years, and with how you've grown your own style and how you've grown yourself as an artist in many different ways as a musician, there most likely were a lot of misconceptions that you may have run into about classical music over the years. What are the greatest misconceptions that you've experienced from hearing other people talk about it?
Misconceptions from others that I've heard.
From others, yes.
This is an interesting question. I don't get asked this a lot. I think a lot of audience members do have the sense that basically the work is mostly in just memorizing a piece of music and then playing it. Because that's the comment I get the most is, how did you memorize it? How did you memorize it? I mean, sometimes that is hard, but it's never the hardest thing, I don't think, really, except for a very small handful of pieces. You know, the difficulty of the work is it's much deeper than that. It should be, at least. And it should involve the soul. And so that is what I do love when I get audience members who are able to speak to that part of it, because that was able to speak to them in that way also. You know, that's when you get a really special connection with the audience. But some people really do think that memorizing is maybe even the bulk of what we do. So that's maybe one misconception. Another one is, I think that we all practice 8 to 10 hours a day, which is not, some people do, but that's not the case for everyone. It's not for me. And then there are other misconceptions which are half true, but I wish they were not so true. Like, it's very strict. It's all about, you know, not playing wrong notes and metronome and teachers, you know, that kind of thing. But that does exist. So it isn't totally wrong, but it is an incomplete view. There's so much beauty in the process and in the concert experience. You know, that is the idea, is that it should be a beautiful thing. And an inspiring thing. So maybe some people don't consider that aspect of it enough, but many do. But that is a misconception that I run into. I once played a concert where, because I move around sometimes quite a bit when I play, although I'm doing it less over the years, but I still do. There was one concert where I kind of, in a moment, I sort of kicked up my foot. I don't know why. It was in the gesture of what I was doing at the time. And an audience member asked me afterwards, "Did you do that to make it more entertaining for us?" And I said, no, I didn't. It just happened. But then I went home and I thought, I guess there are people who would think that would be, you know, for people's entertainment and, you know, immediate enjoyment in that kind of way, which is not what I do and not really what the vast majority of people are not. It's not that kind of thing. So that would be another misconception, which I find a little bit amusing, actually.
Yeah, and I relate to two of the misconceptions that you've mentioned about, and starting with the physicality part of it. I know that there are some people out there who are very attracted towards the physicality, like those who move around a lot in music. It's like, I mean, that's like a misconception. It's like, well, it's not. I mean, it can be distracting, honestly. When if a person's moving around way too much, it can be very distracting. And I think it's more and I often explain to people that first of all, for me, I don't move around a lot. Like, I move around sometimes, but that's only because it's in the moment, like you said, right? When I used to perform, for me, I would move around just in the moment because I just felt right in the moment. But I'm not going to move around for the sake of just moving around just to do that, right? It's all in the hands. It's all in the music itself. If anything should be attractive, it should be through the music, not through my own body.
Of course. Of course.
So that's why Horowitz, very well known, he says, there's some pianists who, and he shows it on camera for those who of you who are listening to the audio only version. He shows it on camera, it's like, oh, there's some pianists who play like this. And he moves back like this. It's like, I can't do it. I can't do it. You know, and that's Horowitz, very well known for mentioning that. The second misconception that you mentioned, I think, is also one that I've seen, especially recently, where it's half true that, oh, it's very strict. You have to play all these right notes and do all this and do all that. I think the issue for people is that they lose perspective, or they don't even have that perspective to begin with of where music would lead a person to, especially for children, because especially at that age, they want things to be fun. It's difficult to express to them that not everything is fun, but it's also difficult to express to them what the point of learning music is. And I think many parents and some teachers failed to do that, where music at the end of the day is to be enjoyed and it's to express yourself. But before you can get to a point where you can fluently express yourself, you first must learn the basics and the intermediate parts of it. I think if more teachers were able to express that to the kids and also to their parents as well, that changes their focus forever. Now they do have a goal, and that goal is long term, and that goal is not just a one way to that area. Well, there is one way through technique and being able to do things properly. But once you get past that point, there are so many infinite ways of going to that point, right? It's like English. It's like, or any language that you're learning. Before you can get to a point where you can write a long paper or a novel, you first must know how to write the alphabet, how to write words, how to say these words and read these words too. Then you need to know how to put these into phrases, and then into sentences, and then into paragraphs. When you learn that, then you're able to convey yourself in a different style at that point, right? I think by giving that sort of perspective of first you must do this, and you must be very clear on the technique. Your hands must have good. You must be using fingertips to play the keys. Your hand must be rounded in a certain way. You don't want to stiffen up. You want to be supple on certain parts, but also flexible in other parts as well. I think by telling them that you must get this down first before you can get to whatever you want to express, I think that's a good way of giving perspective to both children and their parents, especially those who have no idea about music. I think this is what can really tell people music is actually fun.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, that there's a lot of discipline and there's a lot of hard work, but the point is that it should be fun. And I think so I've heard of people quitting lessons after 3 weeks, for example. Well, what can you play after 3 weeks? I mean, you haven't, I mean, yeah, okay. Some kids do get enjoyment in playing those songs after a couple of weeks, but really a lot of people, they don't start having fun until they start playing pieces which they know. That's really the first thing for people when they start really having a lot of fun. Kids, especially adults, are like that too. And I think that can be one of the first things that shows people that, actually what you're doing on the piano connects to something which means something to you.
Yeah. And especially in today's day and age, most, if not everybody, is exposed to some form of popular music or some form of contemporary style. So when they hear these songs, that's what they relate to more than Chopin, than Rachmaninoff, than Mozart, and I'm speaking primarily here in Canada and the U.S. Most kids, and really even most adults, are exposed only to this type of contemporary music. So when they're learning an instrument and they're learning repertoire that is from an entirely different world from them, they're going to struggle to relate to that. Now, I'm not saying that, we should change our entire curriculum to doing that. That's not what I'm saying. I mean, I argue that would be even more harmful, because then, you lose the entirety of what you're trying to do, right? But what I'm saying is that it's that perspective, what you were saying, Carter. Before you can play this piece well, or before you play whatever songs you want well, or even better than what you would have normally expected, you first must learn the basics. You have to. There's no other way to do it. You got to learn the basics of that instrument or voice discipline of whatever you are learning. So I think wrapping it around in that perspective, even in that sense, is beneficial in many ways. Even here on the podcast, like I regularly make references especially for those in my younger audiences. I mean, a lot of them some of them are gamers, right? So I make references to some of the games that they're playing, right? Or if they're listening to like a contemporary, like Metallica, for example, is still relevant after all these decades. There are a lot of interesting things within the music, within the harmonies in there, and sort of the way how the music is written, that has a lot of similarities or draws actually unconsciously actually from classical music, like the tritone, for example. I keep saying this, the tritone, even in contemporary styles, is used as a means to convey tension, uncertainty, chaos. And you hear a lot of that in Metallica's music, but you hear a lot of that in like the Dante Sonata by Franz Liszt. You hear so much of that dissonant, not just necessarily dissonance, but the chaos and tension. Now, if I explain it to them in that way, or if they understand it in that way, they realize, wait a minute, there's actually a lot of relationships between classical music and contemporary music, and really even in a lot of the cultural ways how they view things. So that perspective, I think, can be beneficial when done the right way.
Yeah, we have a lot to. I learn sometimes more from non-classical musics because uh, you catch just an idea of something that they're doing, which is interesting, and then you can kind of take the idea and then you can put it into the classical music that you're doing. Whereas I don't know if I actually learned so much conceptually from hearing other performances of classical music. Sometimes I do, but it can be a little harder because you get so hung up on so many details. Um, and as we get older, we get pickier about certain things, which is a problem. So actually, it can be freeing to listen to other types of music. You can catch inspiration with less hindrance, I think, for me at least.
Yeah, yeah, same here. I have the same experience as well in that sense, and it's very rewarding when I have that kind of perspective. And what's also rewarding is essentially your career so far, in so many of the achievements that you have reached. In your own experience, though, in your own opinion, what are the most rewarding aspects of your career so far? And what are the most important lessons that you've learned in your career so far?
Um, the most rewarding aspects for me usually come uh, in moments in performances like I described to you earlier, but then also in talking with audiences afterwards. Sometimes I don't get to talk with the audiences, which to me is such a shame. I always want to know what they're thinking. Not so much because I need their approval on whether it was good or not. Because of course some people are so kind. Sometimes they'll say such wonderful things, even if you thought it was, terrible. So it's not so much that. It's more because usually I will get a couple of people who say something which is really meaningful. Of course, it's everything everyone says is meaningful in that, they wanted to come talk to me. They went to the concert. I love meeting everybody, but sometimes I hear things that just stick with me, whether it's just something about how much a performance meant to them or just an idea they had about it, which is sometimes so interesting and not anything I had ever thought of before. And that will actually affect how I think about those pieces. When I get comments of that sort, with people who, sometimes put in a little bit of extra work to say something really thoughtful, that's probably the other most rewarding part for me.
Yeah, yeah. So as currently we're in 2026, what's next for the great Carter Johnson?
I have more concerts and I have more music to learn, and I'm looking forward to learning it and playing those concerts. And I'm enjoying every minute of it, and I'm taking it, one concert at a time, one piece at a time, and just feeling very grateful that I get to play all this wonderful music. That's about it.
So as we begin to close this episode, what is your advice to those who want to pursue a career in classical music? And what would you like to say to your fans?
To those who want to pursue a career in classical music, Especially if you're young, I would say listen to at least as much new music as you spend practicing. And practice openly and with inspiration, in addition to all of the necessary speed drill practicing that we all have to do. And go to a lot of concerts. Even if you have to go to 20 concerts, to go to one that you will really remember for a long time, it's worth it. That's what I would say to especially to younger musicians. And what was the other part of the question?
What would you like to say to your fans?
Thank you for being my fans. I can't believe that you're even saying you're fans. I feel like I'm not at that level. But if you consider yourself a fan, thank you for being there with me, and it's such a pleasure to enjoy the ride with you.
And it was really enjoyable to have you on the show as well, Carter. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your day to join us on the show. Your experiences, I think, and even in 2025 alone, but even just considering every single year that you've done so far in the past, it's been truly inspiring and truly an amazing journey to watch and to enjoy. Again, thank you so much for coming on to the show and telling the living legend of Carter Johnson.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you again for having me.
And thank you to our audience for tuning into this episode of This is the Legend of. This has been Carter Johnson, the second prize winner of the 2025 Honens International Piano Competition, finalist of the 2025 Van Cliburn International Piano Competition, and the first prize winner of the 2025 Dublin International Piano Competition. You can follow him on Instagram at Carter Johnson Piano. You can also follow him on his website, carterjohnsonpianist.com. This is where you can see his calendar and the next performances and where in the world he will be in 2026 and in the coming years as well. So be sure to follow him on those areas. And be sure to follow us on our social media. For Zondo, the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and click the bell notification icon so you'll always be notified whenever we upload. Also, follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio, and also on Instagram as well at This Is the Legend of. Or if you're on LinkedIn, follow our LinkedIn page as well to receive all the updates that you want from content in the future. Once again, thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Until next time, this is Amos Vang, signing off for now. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay legendary.